All right, I think we're ready to get started here, everybody. Welcome to our March edition of the Zylo webinar, the SaaS Management Survival Guide for Next Gen SAM Leaders. Before we get started with introductions, I wanted to set a couple ground rules here, some housekeeping items before we go through some introductions. Please, as we're going through this, feel free to submit any questions using the Ask Question box. We will either try to answer them during the session, or we'll make sure we get to them at the end when Jim's going to do some Q&A with everybody. Second up is that you will be receiving a recording of this webinar within the next 24 hours. So we love your engagement and listening today, but in case you miss anything or want to rewatch any part of the webinar, you will get the recording within the next day or so. And then lastly, we love doing these webinars. We love providing insight and information about what we're learning about here at Zylo and sharing that out with our community, but we also want your feedback. So we will continue to do these webinars. We want to make them better every time. So, but please provide that feedback if you have it. So with that, we'll run through a couple quick introductions here. I'll go first. So my name is Ben. I am one of the co-founders here at Zylo. So really, as we started up the business and got things off the ground, was here as we were developing what SaaS management is. My role and responsibility today is around business development and strategy. So I'm really focused on our partner ecosystem, the strategy that we're taking within the business, and focus a lot on really thinking about SaaS management as it exists out in the world today. So with me today, I'm thrilled to be sharing the webinar stage with Jim. Jim, I'll let you go ahead and make your own introduction here.
Well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and the Zylo team. And again, I can't thank you enough. My name's Jim Hussey. I'm author of the book, The Survival Guide to SaaS Optimization. And again, really appreciate Zylo using that in the title of this session. So again, thank you. In addition to the book, I have founded the Institute for the Advancement of SaaS Governance and Optimization, and am very proud to say Zylo very quickly jumped on and joined our Provider Advisory Council. So thank you very, very much for that. And what we're trying to do is bring some independent, objective data research to the market to help all of us SaaS professionals really achieve success in our jobs.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jim. I think you're the perfect co-host today for our webinars. We're thinking about software asset management, the opportunity in front of a lot of software asset management professionals as it relates to SaaS. So a couple of key things that we're going to cover off on today. Number one, I'm going to spend some time providing some stats and insights that Zylo's captured over the course of the last 5 or so years about how the software landscape has just changed. Really from even before the pandemic to now, what has shifted, what has changed, what do you need to be aware of as you're out there thinking about software and SaaS within your own organizations. Second, Jim and I are going to talk a little bit about how you can manage a more complex tech, or how you in your own jobs can manage a more complex tech landscape. So, you know, the world has shifted from a couple key vendors to hundreds or potentially thousands of vendors that you're working with, and so how you can get your arms around that. And then Jim's going to lead a discussion on how forward-thinking SAM leaders can take advantage of this massive opportunity in front of you. How can you be thinking about this and really driving change within your own organization? And then we'll wrap today with some Q&A with Jim. All right, sound good, Jim?
Excellent. Sounds great.
Right, let's dig in. So I'm going to set the stage here. How the software landscape has changed. So really earlier this month, we hit that 2-year mark of the pandemic, and there's just been a ton of change that's occurred. It used to be that the office was the place where we all came to work, and now it's our home. I actually have a funny story. This happened to me last week. I'm actually in our office here in Indianapolis today, and I was on a meeting last week, and on the meeting was our head of sales, head of marketing, a gentleman that runs our BDR program, and an events marketing person. 4 of the 5 of us were actually in the office that day, not even realizing that we all joined from our own individual offices onto a Zoom, where like old days, you would book a meeting room, you'd all show up in the meeting room, and then the one person would be up on the screen that wasn't in the office. But it's just changed. Culture has changed. Sort of the thoughts about meeting have changed, and honestly, it makes for a more inclusive meeting when we're all in a Zoom-like scenario anyway. So it ended up being a good thing, but it was just, it made me chuckle a little bit of man, things have changed over the last couple of years as we've gone from really being office focused to being hybrid and remote focused out in the world today. So I mean, just goes to show if you've got a laptop, if you got an internet connection, you can get work done. And SaaS is really the core of that. SaaS has really become the new workplace where employees go to get their jobs done. And our data backs that up as well. So I'm going to be sharing with you a few different stats. The stats are primarily from our own data. We publish what we call the SaaS Management Index on an annual basis. It came out in January of this year. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation as well to get your hands on that. But the index is based off of a collection of all the data that we've captured inside of our platform over the course of the last 5 or 6 years or so. The data we're looking at here is the amount of money that's going to SaaS providers, so the amount that's being spent on SaaS applications, as well as the number of applications. And this is broken out by company size. So you can see here, as you move up from company size perspective, as you'd expect, the number of applications and the amount of spend goes up. So at the small end, you're at about 200 applications that are available or that are inside of a sort of small to mid-sized company. At the enterprise, you're north of 300, and at the large enterprise, over 5,000 employees, you're at 600 plus applications that are inside those environments. And I can tell you, as you go up even to the sort of the super large enterprise, it gets even greater. Average across our customer base for the number of apps they have inside of their sort of ecosystem or SaaS estate is 323 apps. A lot of applications out there. Spend goes right along with that. You can actually see exponentially as you get up at the enterprise, spend increases. With a large enterprise, you're at just shy of $250 million annually being spent on software. And the average across our customer base is about $65 million spent annually on software. So a lot of apps and a whole lot of money being spent on software to run your business. And so that sort of leads me into, well, where's all this money coming from? Well, it's really because SaaS is overtaking traditional software, and again, it's where employees are going to get their jobs done. 3 stats on here that I thought were interesting. The first one is from Bessemer Venture Partners. Bessemer is sort of a thought leadership when you think about cloud and specifically SaaS. They're also an investor in Zylo. And their projection is that cloud will become the dominant delivery model for all software in the next 3 years. So all software will be hosted and delivered via the cloud within the next 3 years. The next 2 stats here are from Gartner. The first one is that SaaS spend is projected to grow 20% this year to $171 billion globally in end user spending. So SaaS spend is still on the rise and is really not slowing down from Gartner's projections. And then the last one is also from Gartner, and that the top 20 software vendors will phase out perpetual licensing models in favor of SaaS models, rising costs by about 35%. So SaaS models, those purchasing models are vary across the different providers. They're all recurring based, subscription based services, but you could be paying for user licenses. You could be paying for consumption based models if you're buying something that you're using. So a lot of complexity there. Again, when you think about just the amount of money, the different licensing models, the amount of vendors that you're buying these from, it all amounts to a lot of complexity, which then turns into what do you do with complex situations? Lots of times they're ripe for optimization, which we're seeing this with SaaS over and over again. So this particular optimization area that we tend to focus on is around SaaS licensing. SaaS licensing is definitely one of the go-to-market motions for SaaS applications. You buy a user license, you provision out to the users that use it, and you pay for that user license. What we see in our data is that 40% of SaaS licenses are wasted. So they're sitting on the shelf. So all that money that's being spent on user-based licensing or SaaS-based licensing, 40% of it's really, really going to waste. So those users aren't using that license. Maybe they don't know about it. Maybe it's not being provisioned at all to an end user, but a lot of waste when you think about SaaS user licensing. The other area that's really ripe for optimization is around SaaS sprawl. So let me define SaaS sprawl real quick and what we mean by that word. One of the key things that's happened with software, and particularly the move to SaaS, is that purchasing is now decentralized. So you rewind the clock back 10 years, purchasing of software really happened primarily through the office of the CIO. They were out there responsible for doing analysis of what tools were needed based off the business need. They were working with the business to understand their requirements. They were going out and running proof of concepts and trying to pick the best solution that was available to them. And they would go buy that software, deploy it, enable their end users. And that's all changed. So IT still buys software, but so does your marketer. So does your head of HR. So does your sales team. They're all out there buying best of breed tools that they need for their teams to get their jobs done. Oh, and then by the way, employees are also out there buying software as well on their credit cards. So that sort of SaaS sprawl is just the explosion of SaaS within organizations, and all fueled primarily from the distributed purchasing of SaaS application. And that's all led to increase in risk as well as spend. You can see we got some data down here to help power that, but I think the eye-opening stat is that across all of our customer base, about 1 in every 5 employees is expensing software today, expensing SaaS today on a credit card. And then one more stat here to share with you all around just the ongoing growth of SaaS. We at Zylo, we often say SaaS don't sleep, and it really doesn't. We're always seeing new applications being added into our customers' environments month over month. So what this chart is showing you here is the number of apps that we're seeing added into organizations. So at the lower end, 0 to 500 employees, that's about 4 new apps added to an environment on a monthly basis. And as you move up, you can see we're slowly ticking up all the way up to organizations over 10,000 employees. We're seeing 13 new apps added to their environments on a monthly basis. Now, I don't have the stat that says how many are being removed, but typically you're not removing apps from your environment. So our customers, a lot of them come on board, and that's one of the key things they want to do is being removing apps as well as adding apps, and we help them with that. But typically you're just seeing things fill up the glass, not much being taken out of it. So SaaS don't sleep, Jim.
or they turn into zombie apps.
Or they turn into zombie apps. That's right. That's right. So a couple of just key implications of a SaaS sprawl and what we see happen when all of these conditions occur. Number one is application proliferation. So what that means is like you just have apps everywhere. You have no visibility to what's going on in those applications. You have redundancy across the functionality those apps provide. You have the same app being bought multiple times across your organization. So lots of things can happen with the proliferation of applications. Decentralized purchasing, we talked about that a little bit. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So lots of times you want sort of a hybrid model for purchasing software. But you got to be able to have those controls in place to have visibility to what's being bought, why it's being bought, make sure it meets your privacy needs, and things that are important to your business. No real view into SaaS inventory. This is really difficult to get to a full picture of what actually do I own today. What's new, and I'm always monitoring that to see those new applications that are being added to my environment, being able to just have that single view of what's being purchased and having an understanding of what those apps do for the business. Reactive SaaS renewals, man, with 300 plus applications inside of an environment, that's a lot of renewals that you got to stay on top of. And you want to always also make sure that you're staying on top of them from a data-driven approach. That that the renewal is coming up, it's being used, what you bought last year. Now you're going to negotiate that this year. All very important pieces of making sure you have a renewal strategy in place.
And Ben, one of the things, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about this from a software asset perspective, and we'll be talking as we get towards the end of this presentation or the webinar. Is if you're a SAM professional and you look at these list of items, it is of great concern across so many functions in your organization. And we're going to talk about the need to really collaborate and bring together an integrated team to come up with an appropriate SaaS management, a SaaS governance strategy. This is very, very different from those of us who have spent our lives reconciling, monitoring deployments, trying to check compliance. This is of great concern across the C-suite and anyone who's reporting into that C-suite.
Yeah, totally, Jim. And I know we'll touch on this in a little bit. I think that, the SAM professionals have such an opportunity in front of them to jump in and be in the driver's seat here and really drive change within the business that impacts, well beyond what sort of the traditional SAM outcomes that you've been driving towards are. So I think it's definitely an exciting time. And it's, again, back to, SaaS is complex and it's challenging and all those good things, but that equals optimization, ability, and opportunity to jump into this and really help your company solve these core challenges. So
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of the other sort of implications here of SaaS sprawl too, on top of this is, one of the things that when you think about asset management in general, some things are easier to track if they're being used or not, right? Like a piece of hardware, while it can be a challenge to find if someone's using it or not, typically it's something that it's tangible, right? Versus a piece of software that's a user license that you give to somebody that you don't have the data or the visibility to know if that thing is being used or not. That becomes a big challenge to be able to track usage of SaaS applications. And then, right beyond that is licensing waste. If they're not using it, how do you clean that waste up? Increased security risks. People out buying software, when they're buying it, they're using it. They're putting data into it. Is it customer data? Is it sensitive data? Is it PII information about employees? I'm not sure. And so there's a lot of increased risk with having no ability to control SaaS sprawl, and then just the overall lack of governance within the business for how tools are being bought and used. So we like to say that SaaS really at this point is an unstoppable force, like this beautiful wave way up here on the slide, excuse me. And really, you have to be able to get your arms around it. You have to be able to ride the wave because it's not going to stop. It's SaaS is here, and we have to be able to put the controls and processes and things in place within a company to be able to really leverage it in the best way possible. So that gets us to chapter 2 here around the new era of software asset management. So I'm going to keep these challenges, then Jim, we can jump into sort of what it looks like from sort of traditional SAM role and the things that have been focused on to really how that evolves into a SaaS forward type of organization. But back to sort of these new challenges here: app proliferation, decentralized purchasing, and visibility of apps and usage. I got to think about the question of, well, how do SAM teams make an impact here? And when we look at that, this is really around like, how can the role of SAM expand? Jim, how is this opportunity? How is this yours for the taking for a SAM professional? I mean, what are your thoughts here?
Well, the recommendations and my thoughts, Ben, are for us as SAM professionals, we have great insight to probably the largest portion of SaaS spend via the enterprise SaaS that we work with: Office 365, Salesforce, Adobe, ServiceNow. So we're in an excellent position to really establish that key, let's say, core foundation. By being able to then talk with your internal constituents and begin to look at how do we expand this and discover that long tail. We know, according to the statistics, Ben, that you shared previously, we know that there's a lot of SaaS applications out there, but until we understand what it is, what they're doing, we really have trouble developing a comprehensive governance strategy, policies and controls, app catalog, things of that nature. So as a SAM professional, we are in an excellent position. However, we really need to step forward and take the reins, put ourselves into the discussion. And as I was sharing with you the other day, Ben, it's really a long game, right? It's something that as a SAM professional, we need to start talking SaaS. We need to become expert in SaaS, and we need to be able to talk with others across the organization: risk, third-party risk, sourcing, compliance, InfoSec, so forth, and really hammer that core central discussion around the alignment of SAM and SaaS.
Yeah, totally. And I think that alignment between SAM and SaaS, I think this slide sort of speaks to that when you look at the key focus areas of software asset management: cost optimization, risk and compliance, and value. And really a lot of the things that we talked about, you have on the left-hand side there under the SAM column, really the core outcomes or core processes or action items that SAM professionals take in order to drive these key parts of the focus area and the value back to the business. There's nice alignment here with with SaaS management as well. Now it's different things, right? But it's all driving back to that key alignment and those core focus areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, my remarks tend to be large enterprise, mid-size enterprise, and heavily skewed from a regulated entity. But yes, I think SAM professionals have the opportunity to really drive optimization in the enterprise category, and by doing so, funding the balance of the SaaS effort to really get at those risk and those due diligence requirements, the evidence required for any sort of regulatory investigation, things of that nature. So I think it's very, very important for us as SAM professionals to really play a key role here.
Yep, totally. And so then if we think about sort of the benefits of doing, focusing in on those focus areas and driving some of those initiatives that were underneath there, there's key benefits between both of them. And, right at the center of this is the core business benefit. I mean, when you think about this, Jim, and you think about, how SAM professionals can put themselves in the driver's seat to drive these sort of benefits back into the business. I mean, where do you think, where does that take you? What sort of door does that open up?
Well, it's important, and I've worked with a lot of SAM people as well as SaaS, where we get enamored with our dashboards. And I think this is a nice slide because it encompasses so many different data points that you as a SAM and a SaaS professional can really drive some intelligence. So I urge people to pull back, make sure that they see all of the data and try to understand the implications of the data. And then they may be able to sprinkle a few other tidbits in here, such as cost center, business unit, executive owner, things of that nature. And it really begins to make the analysis real to an organization. So that's really what I see is the ability to understand the value of this data, convert it to actionable intelligence, and getting it in front of those executives who can then take those actions and actually, achieve the optimization or the risk measures that are required.
What do you, when you talk about those executives that can achieve the optimization or the metrics that are required, what do you see as what's driving their ability to do that? What's the driving force or the prioritization that they're going through to say, yeah, I'm going to pick this up, and this is now is the time for us to go do this for SaaS, similar to what we've done with SAM over the years?
Well, the organizations I talk to and the individuals who, let's say, are part of the Institute's advisory council right now, it's risk, right? So when you look at the large enterprise, they know that if they optimize that long tail, that they'll save some money, but in essence, it's a rounding error. It's the risk associated with the unknown in your ecosystem that could do real damage, whether it be reputational, operational. Risk has a number of different dimensions. So what I'm seeing is, again, the enterprise class, which we all assume is well managed, can benefit greatly from a SaaS mindset, right? So Office 365, Salesforce, others. And then it's the measurement of that risk, knowing what's in the ecosystem, understanding how it got there, so you can begin to put governance in place, create that catalog that meets everyone's needs. So as Zylo likes to say, freedom in a framework, but it's been done in a way where risk is identified, measured, and monitored. Does that make sense, Ben?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And, based off our conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, around why SAM even ever became a thing, it was risk, right? I mean, that was the reason that SAM teams got funded, right?
Yeah. And I call it the tool and the guy syndrome, where the CIO, who just probably had a very distasteful conversation with the CFO, said, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fund a software asset program. And then unfortunately, they underestimate the effort. It's basically an insurance policy. Here in SaaS, it's much more of that risk has emerged in the last 12, 18 months. Yes, optimization is important. Yes, eliminating redundancy in functions is important. Identifying gaps in functionality and filling it out as you expand your catalog. All of those are important. However, it's the risk, the compliance, the due diligence, the self-assessments, all of those disciplines that myself as a SaaS professional or SAM professional, I want to orchestrate them and bring them together. And this is where, as I said, sprinkling a little bit of other data points into this pie chart really gives you that complete picture, and frankly brings your conversation to a strategic level and gains access to that C-suite very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Maybe we should take a revision on this, Jim, as a follow-up and sprinkle in some of those additional things into this pie chart and see where that takes us.
Absolutely.
All right, so Jim, maybe you could talk a little bit here about what the opportunity in front of SAM professionals, and really what's in front of them if they were really grasp SaaS and grasp a hold of this opportunity. What is in front of them? What do you think the opportunity looks like?
Well, in a mid to large organization today, the software asset professional has a tremendous opportunity to become the voice, the beacon, let's say, around SaaS. And what I urge organizations to do is to not simply talk about SaaS in terms of the unknown, the apps that you've discovered, but always talk about it in its full portfolio, because then you're able to talk about the level of spend, the adoption, the removal, and so forth, all of the other activities that need to come on board. So really, for all organizations today, controlling SaaS is a very high C-level discussion. And as you said earlier, Ben, even Gartner has talked about all of the traditional on-prem moving to so-called subscription models. Well, those of us of SAM background, we know, even though they may call it subscription, it's really not SaaS, right? When you can't go to the tenant or portal or start generating usage data. So again, for our organization, it's all about identifying the risk, developing the strategies by segment or by category that enables my organization to remain nimble, but also reduce that risk. And as you say here, empower the employees. So there's a lot for me as a SAM professional to really push my comfort zone and get me out of what I call the back room syndrome, and really become a front room, knocking on doors, collaborating, and working across a number of different people internally.
Yeah, I think that's what, anyone that is in a business-based career, I think that's what you want to be doing here, right? It's delivering value, collaborating, and working with the business. So I think you're spot on here, Jim, for what this can mean both for an individual, the organization that they work for, but also for the individual themselves as they think about sort of the next phase and the evolution of their career as a software expert within their business.
Yes, yeah, absolutely agree. I believe that SAM SaaS blending, because it's just a dial, right? So X percent of your software spend is now gone subscription versus on-prem. The individuals who do that the best are going to be able to, let's say, dig themselves out from being buried in IT ops and moving more into a strategic role, whether that straddles sourcing, third-party risk, or whatever compliance elements are in your organization.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's move to chapter 3 here, which is actually my favorite chapter of this entire presentation, because there's actionable, tangible recommendations that Jim has that each of us can walk away from the session today and start to then think about how we can do this within our business. So, Jim, I'd love to sort of lead us through. I think you got 3 or 4 steps here for how to take advantage of this opportunity, and we'll take it from there. Let's start with step 1.
Perfect. All right, thank you, Ben. And as we've been saying, for us as SAM professionals, SaaS professionals, we really need to first understand what is in the environment today. Right? We cannot develop policies, we cannot make recommendations around controls and an app catalog and so forth if we don't really have a handle on it. But as a SAM professional and SaaS professional, I really urge you to make certain to not get cornered and just talk about the discovered SaaS applications. Make sure you're talking about all of your SaaS applications. right? Once you have this data together and you're able to bring together a team, and again, I'm a big proponent for bringing in InfoSec and sourcing and vendor management and third-party risk and all these other teams. But once you have the data, what's naturally going to happen is people are going to say, how the heck did this happen? What do we need to do to get our arms around it? How do we structure this either by segments or categories, so we can begin to identify where are we overloaded, where do we have too many project management or marketing apps, where do we have apps missing, where there's gaps that might empower us. With the formation of this team, you can then talk about what are the top priorities of those applications by segment, by category, and ultimately, you now have a thorough understanding of your spend. So again, when you're discovering, include your enterprise SaaS, those SaaS that have been sanctioned or went through some sort of approval, those applications that you know about, but maybe have just allowed without really digging in, as well as those SaaS applications that are discovered by the platforms such as Zylo that you're leveraging to do that. So really what I look at is awareness. So it's one thing to say we discovered this, but we want to be fully aware of everything in the SaaS stack. Ben, does that make sense? Is that consistent with what you see in the market?
Yeah, totally. We see, when we come into discovery, typically, Jim, we're finding 2 to 3 times the number of apps that people think they have. So it's typically very eye-opening when we come in and we present the findings for the first time. People half the time they don't even know what most of the apps are. And so it's also very important, to your point here, of understanding the categorization of them, what they do, who's responsible for them, and then going through a prioritization exercise of how the heck am I going to tackle this, and how the time frame that I need to do something there. So
and what's key is if you're a regulated entity, the regulators are going to expect you to know all third parties in your environment. And they're also going to expect you to have evidence to show that you've done appropriate due diligence to confirm their viability. And they're going to be wanting to see an exit plan or a plan B, let's say, in the event that in many of these SaaS apps, they just don't make it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people within your organization who really will look at this discovery and benefit from it. So yes, step one, absolutely understand what is in your environment so you can best manage and make recommendations. If you can go to the next one, step two, yep. Right? We talk a lot about rationalizing, but I can tell you when I was in my corporate role, if I was making recommendations to someone about eliminating an app or a tool, which of course there's many tools in an organization, I would get a blank stare and no one would take action on it. However, my recommendation is, as the individual facilitating this SAM and SaaS discussion, is if I have InfoSec, compliance, third-party risk, sourcing, vendor management, we've all come together. And now we've looked at all of those applications in each of the functions or categories. A natural separation is going to occur between those that are sanctioned and stable and safe, less risk, mm-hmm. versus those that are going to be higher risk. And InfoSec or compliance or third-party risk is going to put a major mark against that. So then when I go back to the organization and say, these are applications that we've targeted for removal, and you now need to move to these others, it's not just the SaaS or SAM practice making that recommendation. So it's very, very, very powerful. Ultimately, too, what we find is that there's going to be a preponderance of apps in certain areas, and then there's going to be specific areas that are missed. And this is where, as part of this discussion, it's good to have some of these more SaaS-sensitive individuals. We'll call them innovators for the time being, not shadow IT, but we'd like to have them in these discussions so then they can help us identify what are those other SaaS applications that would come in and really round out the catalog. So as any new additions or associates join the organization, they're really getting a comprehensive list versus a a disproportionately weighted list. So again, rationalization is key. Centralization or consolidation is also natural. That comes from the discovery effort. And again, you're able then to put in place some important things around the addition, deletion, removal, or exceptions related to the so-called catalog. And again, Ben, are you seeing that across your customer base as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is prime use case here. You go through discovery, find it all, understand what you're looking at. The next step then is streamline that down, right? Get the reins around it, put some controls in place to know, do I really need all these tools? What tools do I actually need that are compliant with whatever the business requires? Do all these people really need access to all these tools, or is there a way to streamline all that down? But one thing I will say that is it's not an easy process, right? There's change management involved. There's aligning to contract terms. There's all these things you got to think about as you're putting this program together. So it's not snap your fingers and you're rationalize. It's oftentimes a multi-year effort to really streamline this down to get it to the spot where you want it in.
Yep, absolutely. And then, you also have the reaction from many business unit owners. It's my budget. So, I'll do my best. And that's where the reporting, if we go back to the pie chart, if you're able to sit at the CIO, chief compliance officer, chief financial officer, and you're able to do spend by business unit, spend by cost center, suddenly that begins to shine the light then on individuals who, let's say, may not be all that motivated to participate, because you will run into that. But you're right. And again, we're not here to be the police, but what we're trying to do is make sure that we are safely allowing our company to be as nimble. And I hate using digital transformation. I think that's a much abused term, but it's about allowing your employees to have the experience they want while not posing any unnecessary risk to your shareholders, right, basically. Okay, so step 3.
Hey, one comment real fast, Jim. We don't use digital transformation at Zylo. We use SaaS transformation. That's really what we're in right now, is SaaS transformation. So
I like that better. Okay, so now you've heard me mention multiple times on the catalog, and we're trying to do this on the SAM side as well. Is you want to have those so-called pre-approved packages, and then anyone who orders inconsistent with that, they get a flag, via the typically the ITSM platform. But here we using Okta or other means, we want to be able to provide them. Here is your core. Right, so you're going to receive this specific Salesforce license or Office 365, Adobe, so forth. But then you have these other choices for you grouped into the categories, and this is where I think the organizations are all heading to, is being able to give that flexibility. But someone, as always, says, oh, I have an application that's better. I would prefer to use this. So you then need to have some sort of an exception process that's clear and easy for the individuals to follow. But by creating these, catalogs, what we're doing now is we're refining all of our renewal requirements. We're also refining all of our due diligence and monitoring and any sort of a infosec or third-party risk self-assessment, right? So you're kind of creating a middle ground that meets the needs of your innovative employees, but also supports all these other internal processes. And I think that's very, very, very important. Again, for anyone with a banking and financial services sector, healthcare, and other regulated industries, these are all requirements that the last thing you want is someone to knock on your door, which happened to me, and said, we need the evidence to support the submission we have to put into this regulator. And you go white in the face because you don't have it. So this is the chance for us to make sure we're doing that while at the same time supporting the innovation that we want within the organization.
Yeah. Just a quick comment on that too, Jim. I think you go through these 3 steps here of finding it all, rationalizing, and then publishing out that catalog. And all the while, you have this catalog out here to your own users. They understand what's available to them. You're still behind the scenes managing all these relationships, the renewals with all these organizations, making sure licensing is right-sized. fielding incoming requests, watching employees, make sure they're not buying new stuff that's outside of the control. So you get to this point where externally it all looks good, but there's still, behind the scenes, there's a lot of work here to make sure that everything is still up and running and humming along the way it needs to within an organization. So
yeah, and we've talked about that, Ben, right? A week or so back is the operational aspects are going to continue to become more and more apparent to, and the use of automation, onboarding, offboarding, assigning privileges, pulling back files, all of those tasks. Many of them can be automated and will be automated. Otherwise, the operations will be crippled. But all those things are becoming more and more evident as companies become a little bit more sophisticated and aware as they move through this discovery, segmenting, optimizing, and then putting forward a good solid offering to their employee base. So, and I think that's a great lead into the next slide. To do this, what is it we need to do? And I'm fortunate because I'm not a professional SAM person. I inherited it and I had to learn about it. And what I had to do was go around to so many different functions in my organization and try to understand what they needed. And by doing that, you are bringing forward SAM and SaaS as a top of mind issue across all of these functions. And by doing that, it just becomes a very visible, and you have a lot of people that begin to talk. It pulls, as I said earlier, that back office function. And, I know there's a lot of I had a great SAM team in my former role, but, they get caught up with their analysis and their pie charts and miss the opportunity to really get out and collaborate with the business units. So for you as SAM professionals, and I'm sure there's a bunch of you that are listening to this, it's really important to get out there and start talking about the importance of getting your arm around this, but doing so in a collaborative way. Don't have people think you're trying to steal and take, but what you're trying to do is facilitate and make it better for everyone.
I love that, Jim. Love that. All right. Well, Jim, first off, thank you for your insight and your wisdom here on the survival guide for SAM pros as they're thinking about SaaS management. I think the 4-step process you laid out there is one, I think, actionable. People can go start to think about that and really think about how I can make that happen within my own business. And just your insight based off your experience is second to none. So thanks for the time today, for sure. Before we move into some Q&A with you, I did want to let everyone know that you can learn more about sort of SaaS management and specifically around some of the trends that we've seen with some of the stats I referenced earlier in our conversation with this piece. It's specifically targeted at software asset managers. So you can download that today from our websites. And I actually think you can click that icon, the paperclip icon there to be able to download that report. So please do that. And Jim, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Ben, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And again, thank you so much for your support, your ongoing support of the Institute.
Oh, for sure. For sure. We see it as a very important mission, obviously, and love the work that you're doing. So let's move into, actually before that, thank you also for joining, everyone. Really appreciate your support here as well. Hopefully you took something good away from the conversation today. There'll be plenty more of them in the future. And let's move over to some Q&A with Jim.